When your ads are achieving your target numbers, how do you scale them without everything crashing and burning? Well, it has changed a lot over the years, and we've been advertising on Meta for a little bit more than 10 years. I mean, I remember back in the day when it first came out, it was just like the Wild West, and then it went into this period of time where it was like the glory days, and you could just scale things in all kinds of ways. And just like normal, marketers go in and they just exploit everything. They break all the rules. They force things into what they want them to be. They try to manipulate everything how they want it to be. And so over time, scaling has started to look a lot different. And when I say scaling, I mean scaling up budgets, right? So if I have something that is working on Meta, and I'm like, hey, these ads are working, this campaign or this ad set, whatever it is working, I really want to scale it. How do I do that? There are two ways, there are two ways to scale. One is deep and one is wide. So deep is pretty simply, it's just increasing the budget of the performing ad set or campaign. And scaling wide is where basically we're just duplicating those performing campaigns or ad sets. So for example, let's say I have a campaign and it's doing really well and I'm at $100 a day and I want to go to $200 a day. I could either increase the budget of that campaign from 100 to 200, that's way number one, that's going deep, or I could say, let's just duplicate that, and now I have two identical campaigns, 100 and 100. And I would say that wide has forever been like the most common way of scaling, because when you would usually touch the budget, Facebook would just go haywire and things would get really volatile, and a lot of times things would crash. And so marketers obviously come in and they figure everything out real quick and like, ooh, that's not good, so let's try this duplication strategy. And so I would say for the longest time, going wide has been a very common way of scaling. And I remember back in the day, there's like the $5 to $10 a day strategy where you might have one campaign and you would have the budget set at the ad set level, and you might have 10, 20, 30 ad sets with the same exact ads in each ad set, and you would put $5 to $10 per day per ad set. So that's how you would get to your number. So if you wanted to run $100 a day, you might have 20 ad sets at $5 per day per ad set, so you'd get to $100 a day in spend. And I actually had, it was maybe about 2 years ago, I brought someone on the podcast who was a really intelligent dude. And he had been doing a strategy that was just so unique to me. And it was a very wide scaling strategy. And his name was Dave Bassett. And he would scale campaigns in $25 campaign increments up to $50,000 a day and beyond. And so we did this 2-parter episode. It was a really intriguing episode. And you know what's interesting is, it worked. Like we actually, one of the benefits of having a podcast is I get to talk to really smart, intelligent people, and I basically get free consulting. And so I got to talk to him about what he was doing, and we began testing it where we would have $25 in a campaign, and how the structure was, it'd be one campaign, one ad set, one ad, $25 a day. And then it would just be really, really wide. So you do the math on that, and $50,000 a day divided by $25, I think it was something like 400 ad sets that he'd be running at a time. And he had this process to it, and he would scale these things like crazy. And so we did the same thing, and we saw great results with it. But if you always do the same thing, you can get caught using outdated stuff. And so that was only 2 years ago. And now things are changing a little bit, and what we're seeing now is working better than anything. And so as far as wide versus deep, there is a place for wide, and I'll share that in just a moment, but we are seeing that deep, consolidated, simple scaling wins almost every time. And I don't say this just from like Josh's ad account, that we actively practice what we preach, but I say this from over 200 ad accounts that we actively are in and we preach and we work with. And so what I'm saying is deep, consolidated, simple scaling. Wide is a waste. And on top of that, you got to think of your resource, the amount of time that it takes to have the attention in monitoring all these campaigns, all of these ad sets is a lot of work. And there's a lot of variables that then come into it, because each ad set that you launch to any audience, even if they're all broad. Like let's say you launched a campaign with 10 ad sets and it was the same exact audience and it was all broad, or you had interest or whatever it was, and you launched to the same audience. Well, it's kind of like fishing. It's kind of like this ad set is going to go into this pocket of the audience. This is going to go into another pocket of the audience. And so we're introducing so many variables, and Facebook has this difficulty from an optimization standpoint. And so it's hard to optimize. You spread your budget out. And because of that, Facebook can't really do what it needs to do and wants to do. And so for so long, advertisers, we've just been able to manipulate Meta and say, hey, we want to do clean testing and test all these different audiences. But we're in this era where it's not as much about controlling every independent variable. Now, in certain situations, we believe that you really, really should, particularly in ad testing. But in general, it's not really much about all this clean testing that you're trying to do, as it is about letting AI and the machine learning do the heavy lifting for you. Instead of trying to force what you want, you let Meta do what Meta wants to do. Now, the only caveat I would say to deep versus wide, I just want to throw this in here, is wide is better when you're starting to introduce more product lines. So I do want to say wide still applies when we're going product lines. So for example, I wouldn't have one campaign that has like one campaign that is promoting 20 different products. That doesn't make sense. Or 5 different products. That doesn't make sense. Instead, we would go wide only when we're introducing new products. And so that's the only caveat for wide. But ultimately, deep, consolidated, simple scaling is what works. And here's when we look at scaling budgets, you have to look at where things are headed for a particular platform. And you have to pay attention to how the platform is evolving, how tech is evolving, and what they're actually recommending. And so if I was to sum up Meta's mantra, it would be this: trust us. Which is super scary, right? Nobody, especially marketers, we like control. We don't want to trust anyone. We're like, we're in control. If you're an entrepreneur, you're like, I'm in control. I don't like trusting Meta. And we have this thing against Meta. But we have to look at the trend of the direction that has been going and the progression of that. So I'll give you an example. When they rolled out lookalikes, what were they saying? They were saying, trust us to find similar people to the ideal customers that you gave us in a list. Okay. Then they rolled out dynamic creative ads, or now flexible ads, right? They said, trust us to find the best ad assets and the best combinations. Then they rolled out Advantage Plus shopping campaigns. They said, trust us to find your customers. And then if you look at even the ability to select your conversion location of website or shop, what are they saying? They're saying, let us decide, trust us and let us decide where your customers and your traffic should land. And then Advantage Plus audiences, hey, give us your suggestions and then trust us to choose where to run your ads to. Advantage Plus catalog campaigns, let us choose what products we believe are going to be best and who we should show those to. And so if you kind of look at the trend of how Meta has progressed and the intelligence of it and the machine learning aspect of it, well, like any product, you got to look at the fact that it has gotten very, very good at this. At the beginning, it wasn't that good. And so it's kind of like I said, it's like the Wild West, and we're just trying to figure everything out, force what we want. But we're now at this point where, just like any product, each of those features have gone through testing phases and they have been refined a lot since they originally launched. Like I remember when Advantage Plus shopping campaigns launched, they were not that great, and then they became an amazing thing. And over time, of course, strategies, product features, they do, from an effectiveness standpoint, yes, they do begin to change. But again, if we look at the big picture, where is Meta headed? Where is technology headed? Machine learning. And so it's just saying, hey, give us control. And here's what I predict in the future. And I hope we go here because this will be really easy. Actually, it might put me out of business. It might put me out of work. So maybe this isn't going to be a good thing. But it'll get to the point where you can't select audiences, you can't select exclusions, and instead you just open up a campaign and you say, here's my website URL, and it goes in and it pulls all your images and all of your copy and it writes your ads and it puts them together, and then you just set a budget and you launch it. That's where I believe ultimately that's the ideal situation. And that's really where a lot of technology and where Meta is headed, to the point where it's saying, hey, listen, we're gonna, and maybe they won't scrape your website and create your ads for you, but you're just gonna put your ads in and you're gonna do nothing. And it's already moving in that direction. And so the question is, when we begin to scale, let's get back to the scaling conversation. So now that we know we're going deep, there's a reason we're going deep, and it's the way technology is evolving and where Meta is evolving and saying, trust us. And the questions we have to answer are, how do I scale? How often do I scale, and how much? Those are really the three hows that we have to answer. So how strategically, how often, and how much? Well, how we do it is one of two ways. We'll do it manually. We can scale manually, scale budgets manually, or we can do it in an automated way. Now, I'm not going to dive into that in this episode, but automated, there are some different criteria and nuances to it. Like it's going to depend on what level you're running the budget at and a few other things that you have to have in place in order to make sure that you can like run automations on it. So we have a strategy we teach a lot of our clients in order to like scale, and you can set up automations to do that for you. But your campaign structure, there are things that you have to, there's certain structures that it doesn't work in, and so forth. So how we're going to do it, manual or automated. Most people scale manually when they choose their days in which they're optimizing their campaigns and they have to make decisions. So there are two strategies that we do. So how often we do it and how much is based on these two strategies that we use. But before I dive into these two strategies, if you are an e-commerce business owner and you want to learn more about stuff like this, you want to learn more about meta ads, you want to learn more about how to grow your business, increasing LTV and AOV, and how do you increase your website, and how do you conversion rate, and how do you build a great offer that you run with your ads and things like that, then I encourage you, go join the Ecommerce Alley Facebook group. It's completely free. There's a little more than 7,000 of us in there. We go live in the studio every single Thursday, training and optimizing campaigns like over the shoulder in Meta. It's super cool, and it is absolutely free. So go check that out. All right, so two strategies that we use. The first strategy is what we call the budget bump, and the second strategy is what we call the slow scaler. So strategy number one is the budget jump. And so what this means is basically bumping your budget from like $50 to $100 a day, or $200 to $1,000 a day, or $2,000 a day to $6,000 per day. And we have done tests in this, and the most recent tests we did were a few months ago, where we had tested breaking the boundaries of what most budget bumps look like. So for example, a very common thing that you're going to hear is, hey, don't scale over 20% every 3 days. That's a very common thing. It's been a thing like since the dawn. It's been a rule of thumb for like ever in meta ads. And we'd like to break things. We like to say, well, this is what we've been recommended and we're doing and we've been recommending. So why don't we go break boundaries, and what happens if you go from $50 to $200 a day? All right, let's just 4x the budget. What if we go from 2,000 to 3,000? 3x the budget, but at a higher spend volume. What does that actually do? And so we've tested jumps of 50%, 100%, 200, 300, 400%. We've tried tons of just massive different bumps in budget. And what we see when using this approach is typically we do see a dip in performance for about 3 to 5 days after the budget increase. Sometimes it can go a little bit longer, depending on how big the jump is and what your spend is. And this strategy can work really well with the right campaign structures and ads, but the only downside is it can lead to a little bit more volatility. And if you don't have a stomach for that, then you might not want to do this strategy. And the best use case that we really see this for is when you're running what we call a promo sprint. So a promo sprint is it's basically, you're just sprinting. You're sprinting a promotion of some kind in a short window of time. A lot of our promo sprints we do are typically like under 2 weeks. So what this means is, because we're not going to be sitting here and slow scaling for 2 weeks, we don't have enough time, we're going to make these larger budget bumps in the process of that, where we might start on day one, it's $1,000 a day. And then by day 3, we're at $2,500 a day. And by day 6, we're at $4,000 or $5,000 a day. And then we try to lock in by day 7 or 10 at the final amount that we're trying to be at. So promo sprints are where we see this do really, really well in. But again, there can be volatility introduced as you're going into this. And so the way I want you to think of this is when we do a budget bump, like let's say you're going from $50 to $200 a day. Think of it as like driving a car and you want to speed up really quickly. So if you were going, I'm going to use simple math here. Let's say you're going 50 to 200 is a 4x. So let's say you're going 15 miles an hour, and you wanted to go 60 miles an hour, right? You wanted to 4x your speed. Well, if you press down really hard on the gas, you just pedal to the metal, pedal to the floor, what's gonna happen is you're not gonna suddenly be at 60. You're gonna have this slight delay, right? There's this period of time in which the car actually has to accelerate to get up to 60 miles per hour. And initially you might feel the engine like sputter a little bit, or like the transmission kind of shakes for a hot second, and then it just like starts to increase to that demand of the speed that you're trying to get to. And because as you kind of expand your budget, you have to think about this. As your budget expands beyond the pool of spend that you're typically in, it's gonna have to push to colder audiences. But as it spends to those colder audiences, it's going to, and the more they see you, the conversions are gonna begin to occur. And so as you expand, that's why a lot of people, they get stuck at a certain spend threshold, and then they get scared to go beyond it because they go beyond it for a short period of time and it doesn't work out. The cost per acquisition goes up, or the return on ad spend goes down, and then they freak out and they pull their budgets back, and then things like come back to normal. So you gotta think, like, if you've been spending $100 a day in this pool of an audience, and it's hitting this cold traffic, your ads are naturally doing retargeting. Depending on the campaign structure, your ads are naturally retargeting this pool of people. And so your spend, the more you spend that consistently, and it becomes really efficient. So we see it happen all the time. Like, you jump to a spend threshold, and then the results go down, and then as it hits those people, and it gets to this point where like it becomes really optimized. And then the next time you want to go to a new threshold, it has this like almost elastic response to it, like pedal to the floor. There's this lagging time that occurs. And so people get scared. And so as your audience pool expands, as it goes colder, and then it has to like warm those cold people up with that inside of that budget, that's really what we see happening. And the larger the jump that you do, the more time allotment you should have for that lag time. So that's strategy number one. It is the budget bump, where we're jumping, ignoring any thoughts on 20% only, where we're going from small to just really large numbers, or much larger percentage jumps at least. Now, the second strategy is what we call the slow scaler. So it's exactly how it sounds. Now, the most common thing, again, that we hear when it comes to scaling is a lot of people say, don't scale more than 20% every 3 days. Okay, we're rule breakers. We like to try stuff. Guess what? We see it do just fine. But if you want to be more methodical in it, we do recommend having set percentages that you do scale, and you scale at a slower pace. Now, we've seen like the 20% work sometimes, but the other thing to consider is if you were to be in your target numbers and you were to scale 20% every 3 days, it may not be as aggressive as the budget bumps, which is why we often use those in promo sprints, but it's a much more aggressive approach as your spends start to get higher. And as the spends get higher, we see the 20% bumps not do as hot. The other thing is, if you're doing a big, like 20%, which by the way, I'm gonna give you some math here, and it's actually a pretty aggressive scale over a period of time. Again, maybe not as much as a budget bump, but it's pretty aggressive. And the challenge with it is it also takes a lot of mental fortitude and infrastructure to make it happen successfully. So let me give you an example. If I was spending $100 a day, and I was in my target numbers, and I bumped it 20% every 3 days, and I was able to maintain that CPA, and we're to do it at 20%. In 45 days, $100 becomes $1,540 per day in spend. It's a little bit more than a 15x increase in your spend. And so there's something we like to say. We like to say to go slow is to go fast, and to go fast is to go slow. Because after that initial, that's actually pretty fast. But when you're going too fast, it can slow you down and put you in a bad spot as a business. So let me give you an example. Like, after that initial excitement, right, the $100 turns to 120, turns to 144, turns to, so forth, right? Well, after that, there are often inventory concerns that start to come into play. You have support issues from a customer service standpoint that start to arise. And if you don't have the right infrastructure to manage all of that stuff and the revenue growth of that or the spend growth of that, it could be really harmful. And it all works out when it all works out. That's what we'd like to say. Like, everything is great in theory. And as you start scaling and spending a lot more money that you're not used to, and it goes at a really fast pace, it can actually amplify a really bad situation. We have seen a lot of crashing and burning. The ads like crank up, running out of inventory, people are upset, then we have to deal with forecasting issues, we have to deal with backlash. Like, there's so many things that can go wrong. And on top of that, when you move at that pace, the other thing you have to consider is you're likely missing out on much more profitable spend because of the improvements that you could be making along the way in your website, in your funnel, and your upsells and all of that you wouldn't have the time to do, or that you could have in place if you did have the time to do it. So what do we recommend? Well, for slow scaling, we recommend that you scale 3 times per week at 5 to 10% each time. It is a slow scale. So to give you an example, if you did 5% per week and you were at $100 a day in spend, well, in about a month, it would about double. It'd be about $180 a day in spend. So going from 100 to 180 in a month. Now you might be thinking like, Josh, that's too slow. I want to go faster than that. It's like, okay, great. Well, let's increase the percentage a little bit. If you did 7% 3 times a week, you'd go from $100 a day to $225 a day in about a month. So it more than doubles. Now let's just think about this. Most businesses don't naturally double month over month. That's not even common in any typical business, even like double their revenue month over month. So you have to think that doubling ad spend in 30 days, what if you doubled it in the next 30 days? Well, you'd be at 450. You double it again, well, now you're at $1,000 a day within 3 months. So you have to realize that, like, we see all these stories of people going from $100 a day to $10 million a day in no seconds flat. Most businesses cannot sustain and succeed at that pace of growth. So it sounds great in theory, but most people are not there. There's so many issues that arise along the way that you have to account for that most people don't. And again, it's all great when it's all great, but it isn't all great all the time. There are a lot of things that happen. Let's go to 10%. If you were to go 10% 3 times a week, your 100 would turn into $300 a day in spend in about a month. So you would triple your spend in a month. And that's at 10%. So 20%, you're 15xing in 45 days. So you might be 10xing your budget in a 30-day period of time. 10xing, like, that's a huge jump. So 20%, in my opinion, is you should budget bump in these more sprints, but I'm a fan of slow scaling because it gives you time inside your business to work out the kinks, to refine it, to keep optimizing and working on other aspects of your business without having to worry about your ad budget just getting out of whack and getting too big too soon. And so I'm a huge fan of the slow scaler strategy. It's a lot more sustainable from our experience and the clients that we work with that we implement the strategy for. So which of the 2 strategies should you use? Well, just like anything, I believe that you should test both. Because let me give you an example. If I may not use a slow scaler right at the beginning. I might actually do some budget bumps right at the beginning and then slow scale once I'm at an amount that I want to slow scale from. So for example, if I was spending $20 per day and I wanted to increase at a 10% rate 3 times per week, well, it would take a long time. That $20 tripled in a whole month becomes $60. I would likely guess you could sustain the order volume at $60 per day. But going from 100 to 300, that for most businesses with a $50 to $60 typical AOV, that actually makes a really big difference in order volume. And so what should you do? I believe you should test both. But if I had a starting budget of, call it, less than $100 a day, I may consider doing some budget bumps to a number that then gets the orders coming in, that stabilizes, and then I would slow scale from that point moving forward. Again, I prefer the slow scaler in evergreen environments, and I prefer the budget bumps in promo sprint environments. Unless you're starting really low, then maybe consider those budget bumps right out of the gates. Now, before you go, if you're enjoying this episode and the content of this podcast, then please, if you could, it'd mean the world to us if you could just take 5 seconds with your thumb, go ahead and rate it. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe and hit the little thumbs up button. It'd mean the world to us, and it would help a lot of other people find this podcast and this YouTube channel as well.